Junior high was the worst. Well, not all of it. I have some good memories of that period of my life, but the parts that were rough were very rough. The kind of rough that lingers, even close to 4 decades later. The kind of rough that still teaches me too, even today. I've been thinking about my junior high memories lately because my daughter, Leah, is a 7th grader in the midst of her own middle school challenges. Through our conversations, I can tell that she brings home from school some of the same feelings I carried when I was 13. Feelings of uncertainty, feelings of vulnerability, feelings of wanting to fit in without always knowing how. When I drop her off at school each morning and I see her make her way into the building along with all the other awkward and lovely tweens and teens who are probably carrying much of the same uncertainty and vulnerability and need to fit in, my heart aches with compassion and empathy for the risks so many of these young people take just by walking through the doors and facing whatever they may find inside. I know that there are mountains to climb within those walls for many, just as there were for me. There are the mountains of schoolwork, which for some are barely molehills, but for others are steep and nearly insurmountable. There are the mountains of trying to find friend groups while navigating the dynamics of popularity, class, and hormones. And then there are the mountains that arise from bullying, from being singled out as a target of abuse and ostracization. It was the bullying that really got to me all those years ago, and it seems it is the bullying that has been getting to Leah. For me, the bullying was mostly physical, random punches and bus ride noogies blended with a little verbal abuse. At my school, while nearly every boy caught some of this kind of stuff, I had to endure more than my share, at least for a time, until I put a stop to it. For Leah, the bullying has been more of the psychological variety, more manipulative in approach, more based in falsehoods and fictions spread among her drama-hungry peers with social media accounts and too much time on their hands. Still, it's not really the punches or the name-calling that got to me. I could endure those, and I did. And I don't think it's the falsehoods or the social media drama that have gotten to Leah. She could simply ignore annoying comments and posts, block the perpetrators, and so on. And for the most part, she has. The real damage of the bullying, as we have experienced it, has been the unfairness of it all and the humiliation of not knowing how to respond to get the bullies to stop. It is the lack of justice and agency that we have experienced in the midst of the bullying that has been the most disturbing. In my case, I grew up watching Sesame Street, going to Sunday school, where people didn't do things like randomly hit each other without consequences, where we were encouraged to be peaceful, to turn the other cheek, to do unto others, and so on. But in my junior high experience, it seemed, all of that was just wishful thinking, naive, not in touch with reality. In my junior high, if you literally turned the other cheek, you would be slapped, if not squashed, repeatedly. Leah has no doubt been similarly confused about why she has been targeted, and she has been unequipped to counteract the manipulations of those she believes have treated her unfairly. Early on, when she would tell me what was happening, I tried to take a systems view. Of course I did. I know that when we are tempted to name one person or group as the toxic element in our lives, as the cause of our problems, we are often not acknowledging our own contributions to these problems. And so, in response to Leah's complaints, I would try to downplay the circumstances. I would do my best to give the bully the benefit of the doubt. I knew that, like my daughter, this girl was just a kid, prone to making bad choices, needing to mature some into the woman she will one day become. And so I didn't want to play into the drama too much myself and become too quickly triangled in a conflict that just, I thought, needed to work itself out. I figured that some of the challenges that were arising could be developmental in nature for these young ladies, inevitable even. I convinced myself to move with caution, fearing that if I intervened too soon, I could potentially make things worse. I didn't want to be one of those parents. And so I counseled Leah to do her best to ignore the bad behaviors. Certainly the truth would prevail among her peers. Lies would only get her bully so far. And if Leah stayed on the high road, her foe would eventually be outed as the bully she is, and things would return to normal, or as normal as middle school can be. In essence, I encouraged Leah to turn the other cheek, even as I knew from experience that turning the other cheek on its own will only take one so far when it comes to bullies. After a few weeks, things seemed to be getting worse for Leah. I reached out to the administration of the school, sharing screenshots of some of the more egregiously inappropriate posts, and I was grateful for their quick response. I wondered if I had waited too long to speak up. It was hard to know for sure, but I was glad that I was doing something at last, and so it seemed was Leah. Almost immediately, the posts stopped, but the under-the-breath badgering from this girl did not, and neither has the apparent manipulation of others to believe that Leah has been the bully all along, that Leah has actually been the one doing the harassing for calling out the bad behavior of this other girl. I could tell the lack of justice was really weighing on Leah, such that even going to school was becoming a risk not worth taking. I wasn't surprised by her dismay, for Leah's sense of justice has always been strong. She is a Libra, after all. I remember when she was 4 years old, her cousin had been visiting from out of town, and they were having some challenges. As I drove Leah to preschool one morning during the visit, I took the opportunity for a private chat. "You have to get along with your cousin," I told her. "No, Dad," she insisted from the back seat. "You don't understand." And then she laid out a several-point case for why it wasn't her fault that they weren't getting along and why she was actually the victim in this scenario. I admired her arguments and couldn't find fault with them. "Well, okay," I said. I even chuckled to myself a bit as I imagined Leah arguing a case someday in a court of law. Even more, though, I appreciated her ability to argue on her own behalf because I knew from experience sometimes you have to do that. No matter how much we may believe that others should be able to figure it out and stop causing us harm, that we should all be able to just get along without taking bold initiative, waiting for peace to arrive on its own accord will only ensure that we will continue to take our lumps. Sometimes we have to stand up and speak up for ourselves. And so, as I noted that Leah was still struggling with how to navigate being a persistent target and how to make sense of the behavior of bystanders who seemed to be oddly oblivious to the impact of the bullying, if not complicit in it, I changed tactics. I encouraged Leah to do what I've always known she could do. I encouraged her to stand up for herself. I told her of my own story of being bullied in the 7th grade and how it was only after I confronted my bully and told him I wasn't going to take it anymore that things changed. I warned her that if she did the same, if she made the choice to confront her bully, she could expect an unpleasant reaction at least equal in force to the strength of her stand for herself. I told her that standing up for herself wouldn't necessarily improve things in the short term, but it would make it clear to the bully that she wasn't a pushover and that continued bad-mouthing and badgering would have consequences. I reminded Leah that she could stand up for herself without being mean or physical, and that the cleaner her arguments were, the better the outcome would likely be. Be direct, I told her. Be clear. Be calm. Tall orders, all. But I knew she could handle them and that she needed to. Not to set this other girl straight necessarily. Who really knows all of the factors that have been leading this young woman to become Leah's nemesis? Leah needed to speak up to gain back her dignity. I let the school know that I'd given Leah this counsel, just in case anything blew up, and I received affirmation that this was an appropriate route for Leah to take. A few days later, Leah took her stand, telling the girl who had been harassing her for weeks, for months really, that she needed to stop it. "You need to leave me alone," she said. Even just a few weeks earlier, such a stand would have seemed to have been out of reach for Leah. The very idea of it may have been, like the armchair's evaluator take of mountain climbing, an unnecessary attempt to court death, a risk not worth taking. But I trusted that this kind of climb was actually Leah's best shot to court life and to reclaim her self-efficacy, and apparently so did she. I'd like to tell you that everything is better now, that the badgering has come to an end, and that Leah is free from the negative influence of this young lady and her posse. But that's not exactly the case. I will say, however, that Leah is standing taller now. She is not afraid to go to school, and she has regained the dignity that had been taken from her. I'm proud of her, and I'm relieved. I find it fascinating that the learning that Leah has experienced in how to deal with bullies has not only stirred up my own memories of similar lessons, but it has coincided with some very timely examples for me of the necessity to stand up and speak up, both as someone being bullied and as a bystander to bullying. So many of the measures that have been taken up at the Iowa State House this legislative session have felt like bullying to me and to many of my friends, from the removal of collective bargaining rights for public employees, to stand your ground gun legislation, which affords people the right to shoot first and ask questions later, from the attempts to remove the ability of local communities to pass ordinances to raise the minimum wage or establish civil rights protections, to the attempts to bring the unconstitutional and inhumane death penalty back to Iowa, from the defunding of Planned Parenthood and the vital health services it provides that would not be easily accessible otherwise, to the in real dollars decrease in funding for our public schools and the push for publicly funded vouchers for private schools, it seems as though so much of what has been pushed through at the Capitol has been driven by attempts to belittle, if not bully, people with progressive views, and I would argue an interest in basic fairness and equity. Meanwhile, the national political scene in this country has been similarly driven by vindictiveness. Appointees to the president's cabinet who are on record as wanting to do away with their departments, travel bans that are unnecessary and in some cases arguably unconstitutional, the removal of federally mandated protections for some of the most vulnerable among us, the demonization of immigrants and refugees, the proposed health care legislation that threatens higher costs and lesser coverage, especially for the underprivileged, and untruthful rhetoric from our president and his administration that appears to be offered as a sleight of hand to distract us from ill-advised and maybe even unethical or unlawful activities. When this bad behavior is named by the press is called dishonest, with at least as much force as any claims they are making of wrongdoing or wrong-headed approaches. It feels like classic bullying behavior to me. So what to do? I think we could learn a lot from the middle school wisdom gained by dealing with bullies. We have to stand up. We have to speak up. We have to name things as we see them. We must not be content to be bystanders. Will our standing up and speaking up make a difference to our legislators? Will it forestall unfair or unnecessary or even unconstitutional legislation or executive orders? Maybe not. Bullies are rarely influenced by facts as long as they are in power, as long as there are no negative consequences to their behavior. But the more we stand up and speak up, the more doubt that forms in the minds of the bullies that they can wreak havoc without being called out. The more we stand up and speak up, the more cracks we create in the walls that the bullies hide behind. The more we stand up and speak up, the more we remind ourselves of the power of our self-efficacy. The more we live with integrity, the more we empower and influence those around us who need encouragement to do their own standing up and speaking up. Nearly every working day of this new year, I have taken a few minutes each morning to call my elected representatives. I prepare a brief message for each. I tell them my name, my zip code, and say that I want to register my displeasure or discomfort or concerns about whatever is rising to the surface for me that day. I am clear, I am calm, I am kind. I've made more calls to my representatives in the last 2 months than I have in my entire life. Actually, I've made more calls in the past 2 weeks than I have in my entire life. While I'm not sure my calls are even recorded, despite what staffers tell me, I know my calls are making a difference because they are making a difference to me. I have yet to make one of these calls and not feel better than I did beforehand. I feel better because I am claiming my constitutional rights as a citizen to petition my government. I am claiming my importance and my value as a person, and I am taking the risk to voice my opinions not just on my own behalf, but on the behalf of all of my friends who cannot. I refuse to be a bystander to the bullying. There was a time when making daily calls to Congress would have seemed ridiculous to me, but there was also a time when I thought that bullying was ridiculous. What can I say? Times have changed. Maybe your politics don't match mine. That's okay. I encourage you to exercise your rights to petition your government too, especially when you feel you are being bullied, especially when protest seems your only recourse. I keep coming back to the counsel of essayist Wendell Berry, who reminds us that protest that endures is moved by a hope far more modest than that of public success, namely the hope of preserving qualities in one's own heart and spirit that would be destroyed by acquiescence. And so I will continue to stand up and speak up. I will continue to preserve qualities in my own heart and spirit no matter what may come. I will not acquiesce to bullying. I will not accept punishment without making a stand for myself and for my friends. I will not be silent. What may have seemed like a risk in the past is the only way forward now. I will not give in. I will not give up. I will court life. My inherent worth and dignity demands that I do. How about you?